Saint Rita of Cascia was born in 1381 in Roccaporina, a small town in the municipality of Cascia near Perugia in Italy. She was a woman predestined to live an extraordinary life. Her story begins in a rustic and simple context, but soon becomes a journey of faith, patience, and miracles that make her one of the most revered figures in Catholic tradition. Rita lived the tragedy of pain and material, moral, and even social misery. Your earthly history could be from yesterday or today. Already as a child, she showed the first prodigious signs. One day, while her parents were working in the field, the girl was resting in a basket in the shade of a tree. On this occasion, a farmer who had been injured by a hook was surprised on his way home by the presence of a swarm of bees circling around the little girl. Without thinking, the worker started running until he found that basket surrounded by bees. Some of the bees had entered the girl's mouth and could really cause bad consequences for her. But since the girl did not cry or complain, the man did not understand what was happening. However, he understood that the little girl had not yet been stung. Then, not caring about his injury, he worked to protect himself from the insects. After having driven the bees away, the man found his wound inexplicably healed, while the bees had deposited honey in Rita's mouth. This episode was interpreted as a divine sign, a harbinger of the extraordinary destiny that awaited Rita. As time went by, Rita grew up in a deeply Christian family, grateful to God for the blessing of her birth. Her parents taught her prayer and nurtured her love for God and the Virgin Mary. From a young age, Rita demonstrated a natural propensity for devotion and contemplation of the Passion of Christ. However, her parents thought of a different future for her. They proposed to Paolo Ferdinando di Mancino, a man of superior social status. Despite his reputation for brutality, alcoholism, and embezzlement, her parents saw in Paolo Ferdinando the possibility of a better social life for Rita, who, as was customary at the time, was forced to marry him against her will. The saint suffered all kinds of violence from her husband, but with a lot of patience and perseverance, after 18 years of marriage and 2 twin children, she managed to calm the situation. Rita suffered and prayed in silence. One afternoon, her husband was the victim of an ambush. He was murdered and abandoned on the side of a road. His 2 sons, knowing well the rules of revenge, swore to avenge their father. Rita was literally terrified of what was about to happen. Furthermore, given his strong religiosity, he could not tolerate brutal customs of this kind at all. Heartbroken, the woman, having tried in vain to dissuade her children, is said to have prayed to the Lord to call them both to himself, rather than turn them into murderers. Her prayer, humanly incomprehensible for a mother, was answered. The twins, driven by a desire for revenge for their father's death, died soon after, unable to forgive the murderer. Rita, alone and saddened, sought refuge in the monastery of St. Mary Magdalene in Cascia, eager to consecrate herself entirely to God. However, he was initially denied entry. Rita, with determination and a peacemaking spirit, committed to mediate between the enemy families of the town, seeking reconciliation. After achieving peace in the village, she was finally accepted into the monastery. In the monastery, Rita faced all difficulties with patience and humility. Her faith was manifested through personal mortifications, intense prayers, and the miracles that surrounded her. To further demonstrate her dedication to Christ, Rita was subjected to several tests by the Mother Superior of the monastery. One of these tests required Rita to water a piece of dry wood planted in the ground every day, a seemingly meaningless task. However, Rita, without hesitation, complied with the impositions. Great was the surprise for both the nuns and the superior when, after a certain time, the piece of wood began to sprout and produce 2 magnificent bunches of grapes. This miracle was interpreted as a demonstration of divine grace upon Rita, strengthening her reputation as a holy woman. Her monastic life was not without challenges, but Rita faced each difficulty with her usual patience and gentleness. Rita was thus able to wear the Augustinian habit, dedicating herself to penance, prayer, and the love of Christ crucified, that Christ who marked her face, sticking a thorn into her forehead. The thorn had detached itself directly from the crucifix while Rita was praying, a very painful wound which only healed after death. This occurred during a Good Friday sermon of 1443, delivered by a famous Franciscan in Cascia. Rita, eager to participate, prayed to the Lord that at least one of the thorns from Christ's crown would pierce her forehead. Incredibly, during the preaching, a thorn from the crown of the crucified Jesus broke off and stuck in Rita's forehead, causing a wound of intense pain. His forehead continued to bleed throughout his life. At this point, Rita suffered daily the suffering of Christ's passion, but despite the physical discomfort, she accepted her suffering as a sign of her union with Christ. The saint spent her days in fasting, whipping, and endless prayers. The last 4 months of his life were spent feeding solely on the Eucharist. One day a relative of hers came to visit her, who, taking pity on her physical condition and suffering, asked the saint what he could do to give her some relief. Rita asked to receive a rose from among those grown in her homeland, Roccaperina, a really anomalous order, since we were in the middle of winter and we had to wait at least a few months for it to bloom. Anyway, the woman went and with great astonishment noticed among the weeds a beautiful red rose that Rita, once received, gave to the incredulous nuns of the convent. His reputation for holiness spread quickly, and people sought his help and intercession. His life of suffering and sacrifice seemed to touch people's hearts, leading many souls to seek his spiritual guidance. On the 22nd of May in the year 1457, the bell of the monastery and those around it rang inexplicably by themselves, as if shaken by an invisible hand. Rita had flown to heaven. His body, kept in the sanctuary of Cascia for another miracle, remained incorrupt for more than 500 years. Rita's body was placed in a coffin on display in the Basilica of Cascia. Over the centuries, his sanctuary became a place of pilgrimage for those seeking his intercession in difficult and impossible situations. The fame of Saint Rita of Cascia spread far beyond the borders of Cascia. In 1628, Pope Urban VIII beatified her, officially recognizing her sainthood. Later, on May 24, 1900, Pope Leo XIII canonized her, setting her liturgical feast on May 22nd, the anniversary of her death. Saint Rita of Cascia is actually one of the most revered saints in the Catholic tradition. She is known as the Saint of the Impossible, or the Saint of Desperate Causes, due to the numerous miraculous intercessions attributed to her. His extraordinary life, marked by unconditional faith, patience, and miracles, continues to inspire millions of believers around the world. If you like this video, give it a like, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel to support us in our messages of faith and hope. Thank you with all my heart.